In the gentle mist of a Sussex morning, the ancient stone church stood serene, its spire piercing the pale sky, its stained glass windows casting a soft glow of crimson and gold across the pews. The air was rich with the scent of roses and polished wood, the murmurs of wedding guests, a quiet symphony as they gathered in their finery, their faces bright with anticipation. Among them, James Harrow, a 55-year-old man in a carefully pressed grey suit, stood at the back, his weathered face a mask of pride and quiet pain, his eyes fixed on the aisle where his daughter, Emma, would soon appear. As she walked in, radiant in white, James raised a crisp, "Precise salute," a gesture born of his 15 years as a Royal Guard officer, only to be met with laughter that cut through the sacred moment like a blade. For those of you who've lived through the trials of war, the steadfast dignity of service, or the enduring love of family through decades of sacrifice, a soldier's salute is more than protocol. It's a vow, as enduring as the traditions you've cherished, like the memory of a wartime promise kept, the pride of a family milestone, or the quiet honor of a life well lived. But on this day in 2022, James' salute, mocked by those unaware of his past, would lead to a revelation that silenced the laughter, restored a father's honor, and wove a story of love that resonated far beyond the church's ancient walls. Why did they laugh? And what secret changed everything? Subscribe now to uncover the truth behind James' defiance, and join us in celebrating stories of courage and love that triumph over time. James Harrow was a man of quiet resilience, his broad shoulders and steady hands still carrying the strength of his youth. Though his dark hair was now streaked with silver, and his hazel eyes bore the weight of years spent in solitude. For 15 years, he had served as a Royal Guard officer, standing vigil at Buckingham Palace, his scarlet tunic and bearskin cap a symbol of unwavering duty to Queen Elizabeth II. Through torrential rain that soaked his boots, through biting winds that chilled his bones, through summer heat that made his collar itch, James stood, his posture unyielding, his gaze fixed on the palace gates or the distant balcony where the queen might appear. Her occasional nod, a rare smile from a window, was a reward greater than any medal, a silent affirmation that his service mattered. To you, who may recall the pride of service, perhaps a father's tales of wartime marches, a mother's work in the factories during the Blitz, or your own years of quiet sacrifice for family or community, James' devotion might resonate, a testament to the honor found in standing tall, even when the world looks away. His goal was simple yet profound: to see his daughter, Emma, marry, to witness her joy, to offer a father's love, even if the years of estrangement, after a bitter divorce, had left him a stranger in her life, living quietly in a Yorkshire cottage, his medals hidden in a drawer, his heart heavy with unspoken words. The invitation to Emma's wedding arrived like a cold gust through his cottage window, its formal script reading Mr. James Harrow on a plain card, devoid of warmth, a stark reminder of the distance that had grown between father and daughter. James opened the envelope at his kitchen table, the ticking of a clock, the only sound, his trembling hands betraying the ache in his heart as he read the details. St. Mary's Church, Sussex, a place far from his solitary life in Yorkshire. The invitation, sent by his ex-wife, Margaret, felt like an obligation, a formality, rather than a welcome, its impersonal tone a reflection of the years since their divorce. When Margaret had taken Emma and built a new life with another man, James traced the card's edges, his mind drifting to Emma as a child, her laughter as he spun her in the garden, her tiny hand in his as they walked to school, her sleepy voice calling him daddy before bed. For you, who faced such moments of distance, perhaps receiving a curt letter from a loved one, attending a family event after years apart, or standing on the edge of a celebration where you felt forgotten, James' quiet resolve might echo a time when love pushed you forward, despite the fear of rejection, when hope was a fragile but persistent flame. James chose his best gray suit, its fabric pressed with military precision, its lapel adorned with a single poppy pin from Remembrance Day. A nod to his service. He took the early train south. The Yorkshire moors, giving way to the rolling hills of the south. The countryside blurring past as he clutched a faded photo of Emma at 5, her smile a beacon through the fog of years. He arrived at St. Mary's Church early, slipping into the back row, unnoticed among the polished guests in their silk dresses and tailored suits, their chatter filled with excitement for the day. The organ played softly, its notes weaving through the scent of roses and wax. And James stood, his hands clasped, his only desire to let Emma know he was proud, to offer a gesture that carried the weight of his heart, to bridge the gap that time and silence had carved. He thought of his royal guard days, of standing for hours in the palace courtyard, of the Queen's nod that had made every hardship worthwhile. And he knew that this moment, this wedding, was his final duty, not to a monarch, but to the daughter who had been his world. As Emma entered, radiant, in a white gown, her arm linked with her Uncle Richard's, the crowd rose, their gasps of admiration filling the church like a wave. James' breath caught, his daughter transformed, yet achingly familiar, her face a mirror of the girl he'd once tucked into bed. Now a woman stepping into a new life, without thinking. He saluted crisp, precise, as he had in his guard days, his hand steady, his eyes fixed on Emma, his heart swelling with pride. The gesture was a vow, a father's love distilled into a single act of honor, a salute not to a queen, but to the daughter who had been his reason for standing tall. But laughter erupted, sharp and cutting, rippling through the pews like a gust of wind. "Look, the old soldier." A guest jeered, his voice loud enough to turn heads, his smirk visible even from the back. "What's he playing at?" Another whispered, snickering behind the program. Margaret, seated near the front in a navy dress, ignored James, her face a mask of indifference, her eyes fixed on the altar. Richard, Emma's uncle, smirked, leaning to a cousin and muttering, still playing guard. James, pathetic. James lowered his hand, his heart sinking, the laughter a blade that cut deeper than any wound from his service, deeper than the rain-soaked nights at the palace or the weight of a comrade's casket on his shoulder. James slipped out, his steps heavy, the cold Sussex air biting his face as he left the church's warmth behind. He stood in the shadowed garden, leaning against a stone wall, the roses' scent now cloying, the laughter echoing in his mind like a drum. Memories flooded back, vivid and unbidden, carrying him to Buckingham Palace, where he had stood for hours in pouring rain, his tunic soaked, but his posture unyielding. The Queen's distant smile a quiet affirmation that his sacrifice mattered. He recalled carrying the casket of a young guard, Peter, lost in a training accident, his tears hidden behind the bearskin cap, his duty to honor the fallen stronger than his grief. He saw himself at state dinners, standing silent as dignitaries dined, his presence a steady shadow, his pride in serving a constant fire. But at home, Margaret had grown distant, her voice sharp as she called him stiff. A man who lived for duty, not family. "You're not a husband, you're a statue," she'd said. Her words, a final blow before she left with David, a charismatic lawyer who offered the warmth James couldn't. James had kissed Emma goodbye, her small form asleep in her bed, leaving a note he knew Margaret would discard, his heart breaking as he walked away. The silence of those years, a heavier burden than any vigil. To you, who've known such loss, perhaps a family fractured by divorce, a bond broken by misunderstanding, or a love left unspoken through years of distance. James's pain might echo a moment when silence was your only companion, when the absence of those you loved hurt more than any physical wound. He thought of Emma, of the birthdays he'd missed, the school plays he'd only heard about, the letters he'd written but never sent. Their words, locked in a drawer with his medals. He thought of Margaret, whose indifference had hardened into a wall, her new life with David and Emma, a world he couldn't enter. The laughter in the church was a mirror of those years, a reminder that his sacrifice, his honor, was invisible to those who saw only a man in a gray suit, not the guard who had stood for a queen, for a country, for a daughter he loved more than life. James straightened, his hand brushing the poppy pin, its red petals a symbol of the comrades he'd lost, the duty he'd carried, the love he still held. He resolved to return to Yorkshire, to his cottage and his solitude. But a spark of defiance lingered, a whisper that his story wasn't over, that Emma deserved to know the man he was. Unbeknownst to James, a guest's video of his salute had been uploaded to X, the caption reading, "Guard salutes at wedding, royal salute." The clip spread like wildfire, liked and shared thousands of times across the UK, from London's bustling cafes to Yorkshire's quiet villages, sparking comments that ranged from amusement to curiosity. "What a character," one user wrote, while another said, "There's a story behind that salute." The viral post reached James' neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, a kind widow who brought him scones on Sundays, her eyes bright as she knocked on his door that evening. "You're all over the internet, James," she said, showing him the video on her phone, her voice firm but gentle. "Go back to that wedding. They need to know who you are, what you've done. Emma needs to know." James watched the clip, his salute frozen on the screen, the laughter a faint echo in the background, and felt a resolve he hadn't known since his guard days, a fire that had burned through rain and loss. He took the late train back to Sussex, his heart pounding as he stepped into the reception hall, the chatter of guests falling silent as eyes turned to him, their faces a mix of surprise and uncertainty. The hall was alive with music and light, tables laden with flowers and wine, guests dancing under chandeliers that gleamed like stars. Margaret stood near the head table, her navy dress pristine, her glare sharp as she spotted James, her lips a thin line of disapproval. Daniel, Emma's groom, shifted uncomfortably in his suit, his eyes darting between James and the crowd, his hand resting on Emma's chair as if to anchor her. Whispers followed his back. "What's he doing now?" Their voices a murmur of judgment, a reminder of the laughter that had driven James out. But a boy, about a den, in a tiny suit with a crooked tie, broke the tension, his voice bright as he tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "That's the soldier man. He's cool, mister." The boy's wide eyes, full of awe, were a spark, a reminder of the innocence that saw beyond appearances. And James felt the weight of his medals, though they were miles away, urging him to speak. He stepped into the middle of the aisle, his grey suit a quiet contrast to the festive crowd, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest, his heart beating with the rhythm of a march he'd walked 1,000 times. "I'm James Harrow," he began, his words carrying the weight of 15 years, his voice filling the hall like a command. "For 15 years, I was a Royal Guard officer. I guarded Buckingham Palace, stood through storms that soaked my soul, carried the caskets of men I called brothers, men who died for this country." His eyes found Emma, her face softening, her hands clasped tight, her veil catching the light like a halo. "I stood for honor, for duty, for the queen who trusted me, who nodded to me when I thought no one saw." Flashbacks played in his mind, marching in the palace courtyard, rain streaming down his face, the queen's rare smile from a balcony, a medal he carried in his heart, standing at a state dinner, silent, as dignitaries laughed, his presence a steady shadow, carrying Peter's casket, his shoulders aching but his resolve unbroken. "Emma, you were my pride, my reason for standing tall. Even when I lost you, even when silence was all I had, I saluted you today as my queen, because no duty was greater than loving you, no honor higher than being your father." The room fell silent, the laughter replaced by a hush, then soft sobs that rose like a tide. Emma's eyes filled with tears, her hands covering her mouth, her shoulders trembling as she looked at the father she'd barely known. Margaret looked down, her indifference cracking, her fingers twisting a napkin, her face a mix of guilt and memory. Daniel's nervous glance turned to respect, his nod a quiet acknowledgement of James's truth. A guest in a floral dress wiped her eyes. Another in a tweed suit nodded, their earlier mockery forgotten. The boy in the suit grinned, his whisper to his mother. "I told you, he's cool." A spark of joy in the quiet. For you, who've spoken your truth perhaps at a family reunion, a community meeting, or a moment when silence was no longer enough. This speech might recall a time when your voice bridged a gap, when your story silenced doubt, when your heart found its way home. James stood tall, his gray suit a uniform of its own, his words a salute to the daughter he loved, to the life he'd lived, to the honor that had never wavered, even in the face of loss. As James turned to leave, his heart lighter, but still heavy with the weight of years, Emma's voice rang out, sharp and desperate. "Dad." She ran to him, barefoot, her white dress stained with grass, her arms wrapping around him as she sobbed, her veil falling to the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking, her tears soaking his suit. "I didn't know. I didn't understand what you did, what you gave up." James held her, his own eyes wet, his arms steady as they had been in uniform, his embrace a fortress against the years of silence. "I never stopped loving you," he said, his voice soft but firm. The words a vow renewed, a promise kept through every storm. Daniel approached, his hand extended, his face earnest as he shook James' hand, his grip strong. "I'll honor her, sir," he said, his voice steady, his eyes meeting James with a promise that eased the ache in his heart. Emma took James's arm, her tears drying, her smile a mirror of the girl he'd once spun in the garden. "Come sit with us," she said, leading him to the front row. The crowd parting with nods and murmurs of respect, their hands clapping in a chorus of redemption. The guests' applause grew, a wave that filled the hall, their earlier laughter forgotten, their faces now lit with admiration, with understanding. Margaret stood, her glare softened, her hand reaching for James's shoulder, a tentative gesture that spoke of regret, of a bridge not yet crossed, but perhaps not burned. The boy in the suit clapped loudest, his grin a beacon, his mother whispering thanks to James as she passed. Emma sat beside him, her hand in his, her laughter returning as the band played, the dance floor alive with joy. James watched, his heart whole for the first time in years, his place no longer at the back, but at the heart of his daughter's day. For you, who've known such reunions, perhaps a child's embrace after a long estrangement, a friend's forgiveness after a falling out, or a family's welcome after years of absence. This moment might stir a memory of love restored, of a bond made stronger by truth, of a wound healed by the simple act of being seen. The viral video continued to spread, exposed with royal salute, trending across the UK, from London's bustling streets to Yorkshire's windswept moors, from Manchester's pubs to Sussex's quiet churches. Comments poured in, a tapestry of awe and inspiration. "This father's love is everything." One user wrote, her post liked thousands of times. "He's a true guard, on and off duty." Another shared, sparking threads of stories about fathers, soldiers, and silent acts of love. The hashtag Father Honor emerged, users posting their own tales. "I saluted my mom at her funeral, inspired by James." One wrote, "Called my estranged dad after years because of this." Another shared, letters arrived at James' cottage, their envelopes bearing stamps from English parishes, their words a chorus of gratitude, shared grief, and renewed hope. A vicar from Kent wrote, "Your dignity inspired our congregation to reach out to estranged families, to heal old wounds." A teacher from Sussex shared, "My students are writing essays about honor. Thanks to your story." A pensioner from Cornwall, her handwriting shaky but heartfelt, said, "I lost my daughter to distance, but your story gives me courage to write to her. James read each one by lamplight, his medals now displayed on a shelf beside Emma's childhood photo. His heart no longer a solitary fortress, but a home filled with connection. James visited Emma and Daniel often, their Brighton flat a place of laughter, their table set with Yorkshire tea and stories of the wedding that had changed them all. Emma showed him photos from the day, her finger tracing the moment of his salute, her voice soft as she said, "I'm so proud you're my dad." Daniel, a history teacher, asked James about his guard days, his notebook filling with stories of palace vigils, of comrades lost, of the Queen's quiet strength. The boy from the wedding, Tommy, became a pen pal, his letters filled with drawings of James in his scarlet tunic, his crayons capturing the salute that had started it all. His words, "You're my hero, Mr. James," a spark that warmed James's evenings. For you, who've received such gestures, perhaps a child's drawing kept in a wallet, a letter from a friend that lifted your spirits, or a stranger's thanks for a kindness you'd forgotten. These connections might recall a time when your actions rippled beyond your sight, when love became a bridge to others' hearts. James' moment in the Sussex church became a beacon, a reminder that honor lives not just in uniforms, but in the heart's quiet acts, in the courage to stand for love despite judgment. Parishes across Britain held services on family reconciliation, their pews filled with people like you, who saw in James a reflection of their own struggles. Parents estranged by time or choice, children seeking forgiveness, families rebuilding after years of silence. A community center in Manchester launched a Letters Home project, inspired by James, encouraging people to write to loved ones they'd lost touch with. Its mailboxes overflowing with envelopes, sealed with hope. A school in Leeds invited James to speak, the children hanging on his every word, their questions about the Queen, his salute, and his love for Emma, sparking dreams of their own acts of honor. Ex-posts continue to spread, with father honor gaining traction, users sharing photos of their own salutes to parents, to heroes, to moments of pride. A Birmingham nurse wrote, "I cared for my dad through dementia, and your story reminds me why I stayed." A veteran from York shared, "I stood with the guards in '68, and your salute is ours." In the quiet of his Yorkshire garden, under the soft light of an evening sky, James watched the stars, his medals gleaming on the shelf inside, his heart at peace after decades of storm. The church in Sussex, where laughter had once stung, was now a place of pilgrimage in his memory, its pews a testament to a father's love that had silenced scorn and restored a bond. Emma and Daniel visited often, their laughter filling his cottage, their stories of their new life a melody that healed old wounds. Tommy's latest drawing hung on the wall, James in his scarlet tunic, the salute a burst of color, the boy's note reading, "You're the best guard ever." James smiled, his hand brushing the poppy pin he still wore, its petals a reminder of the comrades he'd honored, the daughter he'd reclaimed, the life he'd rebuilt for you, who found peace after struggle, perhaps reconciling with a loved one after years apart, finding purpose after loss, or rediscovering joy in the small moments of connection. This resolution might echo a time when love prevailed, when honor shone through silence, when the heart found its way home. The ripple of James' salute reached beyond Yorkshire, beyond Sussex, touching lives across the UK and beyond. Churches in Kent and Cornwall held Honor Sundays, their sermons drawing on James's story to encourage forgiveness, their collections supporting families in need. A London theatre group staged a play, The Guard Salute. Its final scene, a father and daughter embracing, the audience weeping as the curtain fell. Schools across the north adopted James' story in their history lessons, teaching children about the Royal Guard, about duty, about the power of love to mend what time had broken. A Leeds pensioner, inspired by James, organized a veterans reunion, its tables filled with old guards sharing tales of palace days, their laughter a tribute to the man who had saluted his daughter. X became a canvas for stories of reconciliation, with users posting under Father Honor. I hugged my son after a decade because of James. One wrote, saluted my grand's memory today. Another shared her photo showing a hand raised to a gravestone. James Cottage, once a place of retreat, became a hub of connection. Its door opened to neighbors, to Emma's visits, to letters from strangers who saw in him a mirror of their own hearts. He began volunteering at a local veterans group. His stories of palace vigils and Emma's wedding, a spark for men and women who'd felt forgotten, their own tales of service finding new life. He wrote to Tommy, his letters filled with encouragement, his words a promise to be the hero the boys saw in him. Emma and Daniel planned a family holiday, their invitation to James, a vow to keep him close. Their laughter, a melody that drowned out the silence of the past. Margaret sent a card, its words, tentative but kind. A step toward a conversation they might one day have. A crack in the wall that had stood for years. For you, who've rebuilt such bridges. Perhaps a phone call to a sibling. A letter to a parent. Or a small gesture that opened a door. This slow healing might recall a time when love was patient, when honor was a journey, not a moment. The Sussex Church, in the quiet of another spring, remains a place of memory. Its pews filled with new weddings, new stories, but James's salute lingers. A spark for those who believe in the power of love to transcend judgment, to restore what was lost. For you, who've lived through decades of change, through the rationing of post-war Britain, the joy of family milestone, the sorrow of loved ones gone, this tale is a call to remember the moments that define us, the acts of heart that shape our legacy. Perhaps it's a time you stood tall despite scorn, a meal shared during a lean year, a hand extended to a stranger, a tradition honored despite the world's laughter. Maybe it's a memory from the war, when you stood by a comrade under fire, or a moment at home, when you chose love over pride, your silence a testament to those you cherished. James' salute and Emma's embrace invite you to share those stories with your children, your grandchildren, your friends at the village hall, your neighbors, over a cup of tea. Write them in a letter. Tell them at a family supper. Let them live on in the quiet spaces where memories are kept, where love takes root and grows. In a world that often moves too fast, this story reminds us that honor in silence is a powerful force, that a single act of love can echo through time, touching lives we may never know. What would you do for those you love? Perhaps it's a moment when you stood for someone despite judgment, when you chose heart over fear, when you honored a bond over the world's expectations. Your silence, a salute to their place in your soul. Share it, whether in a whispered conversation, a note slipped into a loved one's hand, or a story told at a parish gathering, and let it be a spark that lights the way for others. Subscribe to our channel to explore more stories of courage and love, and join us in celebrating the legacy of honor that prevails. A light for us all, through a salute that restored a father's heart,